The chilly atmosphere of the attorney's office was oppressive, a sharp difference from the colorful, canvas-covered existence I had once embraced. On the other side of the glossy oak desk, my former spouse Nathan sat with his arm wrapped protectively around his latest fiancée, Mia. Her oversized sapphire ring, a flashy eyesore as large as a sparrow's egg, reflected the harsh overhead lights, deriding the plain silver band I had discarded long ago. They had come to wrap up our divorce, the harsh dissolution of a 10-year union. Nathan's arrogant, complacent grin indicated he believed he had triumphed. He assumed he was abandoning me with only recollections and emptiness. Unbeknownst to him, in just a short while, another batch of papers would alter the entire situation, converting his success into bitter defeat. The meeting space at Brooks Langley & Cole was meant to overwhelm. A massive single piece of oak commanded the area, its top buffed to a reflective gloss, mirroring the aloof, detached New York horizon. This was Nathan's domain, one of tailored outfits, unspoken critiques, and the subtle, merciless arithmetic of influence. I sensed myself as a specter lingering in it, a remnant from a history he was keen to erase. My name is Olivia Moretti. At 34, I felt both worn out and strangely unmoored. For a decade, I had been Mrs. Nathan Brooks, a position I had attempted to occupy with poise, affection, and a subdued enthusiasm for the humanities. Now, I was simply Olivia, and I was uncertain about her identity. Opposite me, Nathan exuded an overbearing assurance that was nearly stifling. At 36, he was at the height of his profession as a cutthroat venture capitalist, a person who viewed existence as a collection of properties to be obtained. He had obtained me, and now he was disposing of me. His arm was a constant attachment to the slim frame of Mia Harper, his 25-year-old betrothed. She was an image of contemporary flawlessness, an online personality whose existence was a meticulously arranged stream of opulent trips, high-end attire, and motivational sayings about embracing your ideal life. Her grin was radiant, her gaze empty, and her attendance was an intentional, premeditated harshness. "So, Olivia," Nathan started, his tone slick and patronizing, the same manner he employed when clarifying intricate investment tools to those he deemed mentally beneath him. "My attorney, Mr. Hargrove, has the concluding documents prepared. It's all quite simple. We've been rather lenient given the situation." Mr. Hargrove, a man with a visage resembling a tightened fist, slid a pile of forms across the desk. My own public defender, the overworked yet compassionate Ms. Lee, offered me a slight, supportive gesture. Lenient was Nathan's term for an agreement so paltry it was offensive. It would scarcely pay for half a year's lease on the modest flat I had secured, far removed from the expansive loft we had previously occupied, the one now inhabited by Mia. I glanced at Mia's hand, placed lightly on Nathan's. The sapphire on her digit wasn't merely jewelry. It was an assertion. It was a proclamation of my substitution, a glittering proof of my inadequacy. I recalled the occasion Nathan proposed to me. We were youthful, trekking through Provence. He had presented me with a straightforward, refined silver band in a sunlit vineyard. He had vowed a life of collaboration, of mutual aspirations. Instead, he had provided a luxurious confinement. "I just want to ensure you'll be able to cope, live," Nathan went on, the familiar pet name a toxic barb. "It's a vast, frightening realm out there when you lack someone handling affairs." The suggestion was evident. I was the delicate curator, the visionary who organized gallery shows while he, the realist, dominated the realm of investments. He had cultivated that storyline for years, gradually, systematically undermining my self-assurance. He'd diminished my profession, labeling it an adorable pastime. He'd managed our finances with a rigid hold, granting me an allowance as though I were an adolescent. He'd separated me from my companions, gently implying they weren't driven enough, that they were impeding me. Eventually, I had begun to accept his view. I had started to perceive myself through his lens, insignificant, incompetent, and completely reliant. Mia interjected, her tone a melodic chime of phony compassion. Nathan frets about you so much. We both do. We simply want you to be content. I locked eyes with her. There was no empathy there, only a chilly, serpentine glint of victory. She was the conqueror, the fresh ruler of the domain. I was the overthrown, banished hag. I grasped the pen. Its heaviness seemed enormous, a symbol of my capitulation. My hand quivered faintly. I could sense Miss Lee's worried gaze upon me. I inhaled deeply, the filtered, artificial air expanding my chest. I reflected on the innumerable evenings I had wept into slumber, the gradual, torturous demise of our union, the ultimate devastating revelation of his betrayal. I had uncovered his liaison with Mia, not via a misplaced message, but through a gossip magazine image of them on a yacht in Monaco, a journey he had described as a men's-only sailing outing. The communal shame had been the decisive strike. I concentrated on the signature spot. Endorsing these forms wasn't merely concluding a marriage. It was conceding loss. It was affirming Nathan's tale that I was insignificant without him. Every impulse urged me to resist, to fury, to hurl the documents at his conceited expression. But what was the purpose? I possessed no assets, no spirit remaining. The courtroom struggle had already exhausted my limited reserves. All I desired was for it to conclude. I wanted to exit this chamber and never encounter his visage again. My eyes wandered to the window, beyond the shining towers to the glimpse of the Hudson River visible amid them. I recalled a time years past when Nathan and I had lingered on the bank of that river, tossing pebbles. He had encircled me with his arms from behind and murmured, "It's you and me versus the universe, Liv." When had he resolved it was solely him versus me? With a concluding unsteady breath, I inscribed my name, Olivia Moretti. No longer Brooks. The ink was a harsh black conclusion on the pristine white sheet. I returned the papers across the desk. It's finished. Nathan's grin broadened. He had prevailed. He gripped Mia's shoulder, a motion of possession. Splendid. Well, Olivia, I hope you have good fortune. Sincerely, the superiority oozed from each syllable. He rose, looming above me, a tribute to his own achievement. Mia ascended with him, an ideal adornment. They pivoted to depart, a radiant duo striding into their luminous tomorrow, abandoning me in the obscurity of their mutual success. As the sturdy door latched behind them, a deep quietness enveloped the space. It was the noise of a world's termination. I didn't experience alleviation. Not immediately. I merely felt vacant. A wide, resounding void where 10 years of my existence had resided. Ms. Lee laid a tender hand on my arm. "It's concluded now, Olivia," she murmured softly. "Now you can commence anew." I nodded, incapable of utterance. I gazed at my hands, positioned on the frigid, unyielding desk surface. They were naked. No ring, no forms, no foreseeable path. The win was Nathan's. I was abandoned with zilch, or so I believed. The walls of my fresh apartment were a gloomy tone of taupe, the hue of capitulation. It was a compact one-bedroom unit in Brooklyn, a district alive with creativity and diversity, but a cosmos distant from the barren extravagance of the Upper East Side loft I had once termed home. The subtle odor of old tobacco and a resident's cooking onions and something indefinable lingered in the atmosphere. This was my novel actuality. A realm of used furnishings, economical provisions, and the overwhelming burden of restarting from zero. 7 days had elapsed since the divorce was sealed. 7 days of unpacking crates brimming with specters of my former existence. Volumes Nathan had bestowed upon me. Images of a beaming pair who no longer were. A lone overlooked satin glove of Mia's I had discovered concealed in a compartment. A finding that had propelled me into a renewed surge of sickness and sorrow. I had discarded it with a profound revulsion. My routines were a repetitive sequence of employment submissions, gallery curator posts, exhibition aid positions, even art store supervisor. I submitted for all. My meticulously prepared curriculum vitae and introductory letters vanishing into the virtual void. My prior expertise, once a wellspring of satisfaction, now appeared as a vestige from another's existence. The creative sphere, akin to Nathan's domain, was constructed on networks, and Nathan had ensured to systematically cut mine. I was an outsider peering inward, my face against the pain of a life I could no longer enter. The denial messages, when they arrived whatsoever, were courteous and detached. We've opted to advance with alternative applicants. It was a mild method of stating I was no longer pertinent. This afternoon, I perched at my unsteady dining surface, sipping a tepid mug of coffee and examining another vacancy listing. The lease payment was imminent in 14 days. My agreement funds after settling the initial month's lease and deposit were diminishing at a disturbing pace. Anxiety, icy and acute, was a perpetual associate, a constriction intensifying in my abdomen. That's when the intercom blared. A startling, unpleasant noise that caused me to leap. I wasn't anticipating anybody. My scarce remaining acquaintances knew to phone beforehand. Navigating around me as if I were recuperating, I activated the speaker. A distorted voice responded. Delivery for Olivia Moretti. A delivery? My thoughts raced. Had Nathan dispatched something? A concluding mocking message. A container of my belongings he'd overlooked. My pulse throbbed against my chest. I granted access, my palms damp with anxious perspiration. Shortly after, a youthful individual in a neat outfit appeared at my entrance, clutching a dense ivory envelope. It seemed substantial, significant. The sender's address was imprinted in refined, strict script in the upper left. Hawthorne and Pierce LLP. I didn't identify the title. It resonated ancient, esteemed, and costly. My gut sank. This must be an additional legal invoice. Some unanticipated cost from the divorce that would erase the remainder of my resources. Endorse here, please, the messenger stated, extending an electronic device. My hand trembled as I scrawled an uneven signature. He delivered the envelope and departed, his steps resounding along the slim corridor. I shut the door, resting against it. The envelope gripped in my grasp like a condemnation. It was composed of dense, premium material, the sort that hinted at vast riches and grave matters. I was petrified to unveil it. For hours I abandoned it on the dining surface, orbiting it like a fatigued creature. I tidied the unit, reorganized my tomes, performed anything to evade facing the possible catastrophe it held. Ultimately, as twilight colored the metropolis in tones of slate and amber, I could endure it no further. With a profound inhalation, I sliced it open with a culinary blade. Within was not an invoice, but a solitary creased page of the identical substantial material. The correspondence was official, the verbiage thick with juridical terms, but a handful of terms sprang out at me. An official invitation to participate in the recitation of the final testament and will of our patron, Mr. Reginald Hawthorne. Reginald Hawthorne. The designation signified nothing to me. I had never encountered it. As a designated recipient? My thoughts spun. This must be an error. Administrative blunder. There must be another Olivia Moretti in New York, one who acquainted with a gentleman named Reginald Hawthorne, one who navigated in spheres where distinguished legal entities dispatched invitations on ivory stationery. I perused the correspondence repeatedly. My designation, my novel residence, it was all accurate. The recitation was planned for the day following tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning at their premises on Wall Street. A surge of doubt overwhelmed me. Was this some intricate vicious jest engineered by Nathan? It resembled his approach, a method to suspend a false expectation before me, only to withdraw it merely to observe my collapse. He would deem it amusing. The notion made me ill. I nearly discarded the correspondence. It was more secure to presume it was a mistake, a harsh gag. To aspire, to permit even a fragment of illumination into the choking gloom of my existence felt too perilous. Aspiration was an extravagance I could no longer sustain. But something halted me. A spark of what? Inquisitiveness. Rebellion. What if it wasn't an error? What if it wasn't a hoax? I had nothing remaining to forfeit. My former existence was vanished. My occupational life was in ruins. My finances were a countdown explosive. What was the gravest that could occur? I would attend this upscale legal entity, be informed there was a mistake, and depart feeling silly for a brief period. It was a minor cost to extinguish the minuscule, treacherous ember of what if. I creased the correspondence and repositioned it in its envelope. I would attend. I would enter the predator's lair if only to demonstrate to myself that I could. For the initial occasion in an extended period, a sensation other than hopelessness started to awaken within me. It was a delicate, unknown feeling. But it was present, a feeling of mystery, a murmur of a potential that my narrative wasn't concluded, that the ultimate section hadn't yet been composed. The entrance hall of the structure on Wall Street was a temple of business might. Towering roofs, vast expanses of buffed stone, and a subdued, respectful quietness that made my faded boots seem embarrassingly noisy. I clutched the handle of my bag, the ivory envelope secured safely within, a credential to a realm I didn't fit in. My attire, a basic navy gown I'd possessed for years, the finest item I retained, felt woefully insufficient. The premises of Hawthorne and Pierce filled the whole 80th level. When the lift doors softly parted, I was greeted with an ambience of traditional affluence. The atmosphere scented of hide, timber varnish, and legacy. No hurried receptionist here, merely a single flawlessly attired lady who addressed me by name before I could even declare myself. "Ms. Moretti, Mr. Pierce is awaiting you." She guided me along a broad rug-covered passage adorned with canvas portraits of severe-visaged gentlemen who appeared as if they'd individually funded dynasties. My pulse thumped an anxious beat against my ribs. This seemed far too authentic to be a jest. The mere magnitude of the location, the serene, unshakable poise it radiated. Nathan could be harsh, but his harshness was dramatic. This was something distinct entirely. This was considerable. The lady unlocked a pair of substantial walnut doors, disclosing an office that was bigger than my whole unit. Ceiling-high panes provided a stunning sweeping vista of the metropolis and the river. A gentleman stood facing away from me, staring out the pane. He pivoted as I arrived, and a mild, inviting grin eased the creases on his countenance. He was in his late 60s, with a mane of dense gray hair, compassionate, astute eyes, and a garment that was likely valued more than my vehicle. "Miss Moretti Olivia, thank you for arriving. I am Edmund Pierce." His tone was a warm, comforting deep voice. He motioned to one of two luxurious hide armchairs before an enormous uncluttered workstation. "Please take a seat." I perched on the rim of the chair, feeling like a finch alighted on a seat of power. "Mr. Pierce, I believe there might have been an error. I obtained your invitation, but I don't recognize anyone by the name of Reginald Hawthorne." He settled across from me, his demeanor patient, comprehending. There is no error, I guarantee you. Please permit me to clarify. Reginald Hawthorne was my closest companion and my most vital patron for over 40 years. He departed peacefully last week. He halted, a spark of authentic melancholy in his eyes. Reginald was a very secluded individual, a hermit, the journals are terming him now. He constructed an immense wealth, but he never pursued the spotlight. His utmost remorse, the one authentic grief of his existence, originated from a decision he made when he was very youthful. I attended, my bewilderment increasing. What did any of this relate to me? When Reginald was merely 19, Mr. Pierce proceeded, his stare fixed on mine. His beloved, a young lady he cherished greatly, became expectant. They were youths truly. Her kin was rigidly devout, and the disgrace would have devastated them. Under tremendous strain, they made the anguishing choice to relinquish their infant daughter for a sealed adoption. He allowed the phrases to linger in the atmosphere. A narrative of adolescent calamity, a frequent one, maybe, but I still couldn't perceive the link. They separated paths. Reginald continued to erect his domain, but he never wedded, never bore other offspring. He expended the final 50 years of his existence, and a considerable segment of his wealth, hunting for that misplaced daughter. He merely desired to know she was secure, that she'd experienced a fine existence. Edmund Pierce inclined forward marginally, his tone lowering. A few years passed, he ultimately located her, or rather, he located her documents. Her name was Elena. She had been embraced by an affectionate duo. She had matured, wedded a man named Luca Moretti, and had become a gifted painter. The designation struck me like a bodily impact. Elena and Luca Moretti, my parents. My mother, Elena, had succumbed to illness when I was 12. My father, Luca, a fervent but striving composer, had perished in a vehicular mishap just after I began university. My mother, I murmured, my voice. She always pondered about her biological parents. She hunted for years, but with a sealed adoption in those days. I know, Mr. Pierce stated gently. Reginald discovered that, too. And it shattered his spirit because by the time he located her, it was too tardy. Elena had already departed. Tears surged in my eyes, warm and abrupt. Tears for my mother, for the reunion she never experienced, for the grandfather I never realized existed. The elements were aligning, forming an image so extensive and implausible I could scarcely grasp it. But in locating Elena, Mr. Pierce said, his compassionate eyes locking mine. He located you, Olivia. He clarified that for the past year Reginald had been observing me from afar. He had employed confidential detectives, not to encroach, but to comprehend. He knew about my vocation, my zeal for creativity, a zeal, Mr. Pierce observed, that I shared with my mother and my grandfather, who had been an abundant accumulator. He knew about my union to Nathan. He knew about the divorce, about Nathan's harshness and monetary dominance. He had witnessed my fortitude, my endurance, my serene honor in the face of it all. He didn't wish to upset your existence, to emerge unexpectedly and provoke a jolt. Mr. Pierce said he was attempting to discover the appropriate manner, the appropriate moment to approach you. He was unwell, you see. He knew his time was limited. He composed you correspondences, scores of them, that he never dispatched. He extended into a compartment and extracted a single recognizable ivory envelope. It was identical to the one I had obtained. This one, however, was sealed and merely had Olivia inscribed on the front in a robust, slightly unsteady script. This is the final will and testament of Reginald Hawthorne, he said, his tone now formal. He fractured the seal and unfolded the record. He cleared his vocal cords and commenced to recite. There were donations to benevolent causes, funds for galleries, and ample retirement for his modest domestic personnel. And then arrived the concluding astonishing provision. All the residue of my estate, encompassing all estates, tangible and intangible, all equities, obligations, and investments, and my dominant stake in Hawthorne Enterprises, I bequeath to my only remaining successor, my cherished granddaughter, Olivia Elena Moretti. The phrases appeared to resound in the immense silent office. I gazed at him, my intellect a total void. It was as if he had articulated in an unfamiliar tongue, dominant stake. Hawthorne Enterprises. It signified nothing. Mr. Pierce must have perceived the incomprehension on my countenance. He set the will down and regarded me, his demeanor a blend of empathy and seriousness. "Olivia," he said tenderly, "do you comprehend what this signifies?" I shook my head, speechless. Reginald Hawthorne was one of the richest individuals in the nation. His net value is approximated to be in the billions. Billion. The term was an absurdity. It was a figure so vast it was insignificant. It was a notion from films, from news titles, not from the existence of a lady who was concerned about settling next month's lease. I began to chuckle. It wasn't a noise of delight or entertainment. It was a frenzied, deranged noise that was half weep. It was the noise of an intellect fracturing under the pure, overwhelming burden of an impossible actuality. Olivia Moretti, the lady my former spouse had just rejected as valueless, had just inherited a wealth. The contest had just transformed, and the field had been overturned so fiercely that no one, least of all me, knew where the elements would settle. Departing the premises of Hawthorne and Pierce felt like emerging from a pressurized vessel into a different environment. The din of downtown New York, the thunder of the subway above, the impatient honk of cab horns. It all sounded subdued, remote, as if I were hearing it through liquid. I strolled for streets without any orientation, my feet progressing automatically while my intellect staggered, attempting to handle the monumental jolt that had just overturned my world. Billionaire. The term was an alien entity embedded in my brain, too large and sharp to be integrated. It didn't feel authentic. How could it be? Just the day before, I was tallying the spare coins in my purse to determine if I had sufficient for a lot. Today I was a numeral with 9 zeros. When I ultimately returned to my small taupe unit, the location felt foreign. The unsteady dining surface, the used couch, the notched mug in the basin, they were relics from an existence that was no longer mine. I felt a peculiar sense of displacement, like a specter haunting my own recent history. I sat on the ground, my back against the cool partition, and opened the dossier Mr. Pierce had provided me. It wasn't merely juridical records. It was her existence. It was my grandfather's existence. There were images of an attractive young gentleman with compassionate, sorrowful eyes. There were correspondences, scores of them, all directed to my mother, Elena. They were brimming with a lifetime of remorse, of affection for a daughter he never acquainted. "My dearest Elena," one commenced. "Today you would have been 52. I ponder if your locks have threads of silver. I ponder if you still possess the same chuckle I recall from the one image of you. I own a blurry picture from your secondary school annual. Do you sketch? Are you joyful? There is not a day that passes that I do not pose these inquiries to the quietness. I read through the darkness, tears cascading down my cheeks. I wasn't merely inheriting a wealth. I was inheriting a lineage. I was uncovering a heritage I never realized I possessed. A tale of affection, deprivation, and a profound, enduring sorrow. I felt an overpowering grief for my mother, who had perished feeling like an orphan, never realizing she was the adored, long-misplaced daughter of a gentleman who would have shifted peaks for her. And I felt a deep grief for Reginald, the grandfather I would never encounter, A gentleman who had lived an existence of immense riches but profound sentimental impoverishment, all because of one adolescent, heartbreaking resolution. By the time the dawn ascended, projecting a faint gray illumination through my pain, the jolt had begun to diminish, substituted by a perplexing mixture of feelings, sorrow, indignation, and a frightening sense of accountability. This wasn't merely currency. It was a heritage. And then my realm detonated. Mr. Pierce had cautioned me that the information would disseminate eventually, but I hadn't foreseen the velocity or the intensity. A business reporter informed by a contact within the estate court published the account. The secluded tycoon's concealed granddaughter, an obscure gallery curator, inherits the Hawthorne wealth. My device, which had been mute for weeks, began to vibrate and ring with a persistent, manic vigor. It was a symphony of alerts, each one an electronic invasion into my delicate condition of astonishment. First arrived the journalists, regional broadcasts, countrywide channels, European scandal sheets. They were unyielding, phoning, messaging, emailing. Miss Moretti, an instant of your time. Can you verify the inheritance? How does it feel to be the fairy tale heiress? That was the label they adopted. The fairy tale heiress, a storybook narrative that removed all the sorrow and intricacy, diminishing my tale to an inexpensive, sensational banner. Then arrived the acquaintances, individuals I hadn't communicated with in years, former university housemates, past co-workers, remote relatives I'd encountered once at a ceremony. Their communications were sickeningly saccharine, full of artificial reminiscence and thinly concealed opportunism. Liv, oh my goodness, I just learned. We must reunite. Olivia, sweetheart, I was just contemplating you recently. Investment consultants, asset supervisors, and portfolio directors emerged from nowhere, all vowing to safeguard and expand my newfound riches. Their emails overflowed my mailbox. A virtual horde of predators encircling the aroma of blood in the liquid. It was overpowering, choking. My compact unit no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like an enclosure with the whole world compressing upon me. I deactivated my device, disconnected my computer. I closed the shades, immersing the space in partial obscurity, and perched in the quietness, my heart pounding against my chest. I felt a terrifying sense of dizziness. I had spent the previous year feeling unseen, rejected. Now I was excessively visible, a product to be examined, evaluated, and utilized. My persona was being rewritten by outsiders. My individual tragedy distorted into a communal display. Amid the turmoil, one notion kept surfacing. A cold, solid pebble in the swirling ocean of my emotions. Nathan, what would he contemplate when he viewed the information? I could envision his countenance perfectly, the preliminary disbelief succeeded by a surge of stammering, blazing fury. The lady he had considered worthless. The lady he had discarded for a fresher, more dazzling version, was now infinitely richer than he could ever envision. His meticulously built world, where he was the victor and I was the defeated, had been completely obliterated. The influence balance hadn't just altered. It had been eradicated by an atomic explosion. A portion of me, a shadowy, spiteful portion I was embarrassed to recognize, relished the notion of his disgrace, but a greater portion of me felt an icy fear. Nathan was not a gentleman who embraced loss elegantly. His self-importance was a delicate, monstrous entity. He would not release this. I was no longer simply Olivia Moretti, the struggling gallery curator. I was the fairy tale heiress. And I had a frightening sensation that my tale was far from concluded. The world was observing and I had no notion what to do subsequently. The sole thing I knew for certain was that I was utterly, completely isolated. The disorder of the external world compelled my action. Within 48 hours, My Brooklyn unit had become unsustainable. Photographers were stationed on the pavement, their extended lenses directed at my panes like marksman weapons. My neighbors, initially inquisitive, were now openly antagonistic about the disturbance. I was a captive in my own residence. Edmund Pierce, praise his composed, fatherly demeanor, organized everything. A discreet protection squad escorted me away in the depth of night to an expansive accommodation at the Waldorf Astoria, listed under a fictitious designation. It was a realm of muted hallways, impeccable assistants, and reinforced panes overlooking the metropolis. The opulence was excessive, a stark contrast to my prior existence, but the obscurity it offered was a salvation. It was a luxurious enclosure, but for now it was a secure one. For the initial few days, I did nothing but persist. I requested in-room dining, indulged in extended soaks in the stone basin, and gazed at the urban illuminations, feeling completely separated from the world beneath. Edmund visited each day, bringing not just juridical papers, but wraps from his preferred eatery and a serene, stabilizing demeanor. He didn't urge. He allowed me to handle, allowed me to mourn for the lineage I'd just discovered and forfeited, and allowed me to adjust to the pure, frightening extent of my novel actuality. Hawthorne Enterprises wasn't merely a corporation. It was a dominion. It had stakes in sustainable power, life sciences, property, and international shipping. The holdings were vertigo-inducing. Edmund began guiding me through it, streamlining the intricate frameworks, clarifying the charitable divisions my grandfather had founded, and delineating the primary figures on the leadership council. Reginald relied on his group. Edmund clarified one afternoon as we perched in the lounge area, encircled by economic summaries. But he always retained ultimate control. Now that control is yours, Olivia, the burden of that declaration was oppressive. I was a gallery curator. My proficiency was in 18th century French artists, not 21st century business management. I don't know how to manage any of this, I admitted, my tone scarcely a murmur. I'm not capable. Reginald didn't select you for your economic expertise, Edmund said tenderly. He selected you for your personality. He observed your intellect, your honesty, your tenacity. He believed you possessed a firm ethical guide. That, my dear, is more crucial than any degree. His belief in me was a delicate flickering light in the gloom of my self-doubt. I held on to it. I commenced to peruse, to examine. I consumed the summaries, my grandfather's personal diaries, and the elaborate annotations he'd left for me. An image began to form of a brilliant, honorable gentleman who exercised his immense influence with a serene, considerate sense of duty. He wasn't a hunter like Nathan. He was a creator. It was during one of these midnight examination sessions poring over a dossier on recent purchases that I noticed it. A designation that made the blood congeal in my veins. Shadow Equity Group, Nathan's organization. My heart commenced to thump a frantic, weighty cadence. Hawthorne Enterprises was a primary patron of the institution where Nathan was a senior associate. They had managed several major deals for my grandfather's corporation over the recent years. With quivering hands, I delved further into the dossier. It outlined an aggressive merger that Shadow Equity had coordinated on behalf of Hawthorne Enterprises 6 months earlier. The objective was a smaller pioneering ecotech firm called Lumina Tech. I remembered perusing about it at the time. Lumina had been on the cusp of advancement in wind turbine performance. They were a favorite of the green innovation sphere. Then abruptly they were vanished, engulfed entirely by a larger concealed organization. The agreement had been infamously savage. Shadow Equity, led by Nathan, had utilized every aggressive method available, lowering share values, initiating a defamation effort against Lumina's leader, and ultimately compelling them into a transaction at a portion of their value. The leader, a brilliant researcher named Dr. Elias Kane, had been economically and vocationally devastated. I had never linked it to Nathan at the time. He had been ambiguous, mentioning only a large forceful agreement that was earning him a wealth in incentives. Viewing it presented in monochrome, his designation, his plan, the savage result made me feel nauseous. This was the gentleman I had shared a resting place with. But then I discovered something else. Concealed in the rear of the dossier was a distinct folder containing my grandfather's personal annotations. His script was refined but emphatic. He had been probing the Lumina agreement himself. Pierce. One annotation read, "Examine the shadow equity purchase of Lumina. The approaches are repugnant, aggressive, not how we conduct affairs." Brooks's group seems to have operated with an unusual level of independence. Something isn't correct here. Another annotation was even more alarming. Nathan Brooks, my granddaughter's spouse. Is this a coincidence? I cannot tolerate coincidences. This gentleman's repute is one of unrestrained aspiration. I fear he has exploited his link to me, however indirect, to his benefit. My grandfather had known. He had perceived Nathan for precisely who he was, and he had been on the brink of addressing it. In that instant, everything solidified. This wasn't about vengeance, not in the trivial, sentimental sense. I didn't desire to merely injure Nathan. That would render me no superior to him. This was about equity. It was about correcting an injustice that had been inflicted not just to Dr. Kane and his firm, but to the very ideals my grandfather had adhered to. The inheritance was not a bludgeon to strike my former spouse with. It was a barrier and a blade. It was the instrument I would employ to respect Reginald Hawthorne's heritage. My objective, once a hazy, frightening emptiness, was now perfectly clear. I retrieved the device and contacted Edmund, my tone steady, my determination like iron. "Edmund," I said, "I require you to arrange a conference for me. Not with the Council of Hawthorne Enterprises, with the Council of Shadow Equity Group." The Shadow Equity Group conference chamber was a sanctuary to male vanity, dark timber, polished metal, and an absurdly extended desk that could have accommodated an ancient battle assembly. It was the core of Nathan's realm, a location where he had presided, created fortunes, and ruined lives. Today, I was entering the core of the monster. I was not the identical lady who had endorsed those divorce papers 14 days ago. That lady was a specter, a faint replica of herself. The lady who entered through the dual doors of that conference chamber was Olivia Moretti, chairperson of Hawthorne Enterprises. I had expended the previous 3 days readying with Edmund and a selected squad of Hawthorne's leading juridical and economic experts. We had scrutinized every aspect of the Lumina purchase. We had charted Nathan's plan, his covert negotiations, the moral and possibly juridical boundaries he had transgressed. I was equipped not with sentiment, but with data, numbers, and an unyielding sense of objective. My arrival provoked a wave of confusion. The council members, an assortment of gray-haired, striped-suited gentlemen, were anticipating a standard quarterly assessment. They were not anticipating me, and they certainly weren't anticipating to witness Nathan Brooks, their star performer, their most forceful negotiator, turn a ghostly hue of pale. He was positioned at the front of the desk when I entered, accompanied by Edmund and 2 of my attorneys. His lips parted slightly, a spark of pure, undiluted astonishment in his eyes. He had viewed the titles. Of course, the Globe had viewed them. But to him, I was still just Liv, the innocent curator. He probably envisioned I was off on a purchasing extravaganza on Fifth Avenue, squandering my wealth. He never in his most extravagant, most conceited visions imagined I would be here in his conference chamber, in his domain. A formal-appearing gentleman I identified from my inquiry as the organization's leader, Victor Kane, ascended to his feet. Miss Moretti, this is an unforeseen astonishment. We weren't informed you would be participating. I regret the interruption, Mr. Kane, I said, my tone composed and distinct, revealing none of the excitement surging through my veins. I'm here today in my role as the new leader of Hawthorne Enterprises, your organization's biggest patron. I believe an issue of some immediacy demands our prompt consideration. I proceeded to the vacant seat directly facing Nathan and settled, positioning my hidebound portfolio on the desk with a soft, conclusive thump. Edmund and my squad assumed their positions beside me. The influence balance in the space had altered so tangibly. It was nearly a tangible energy. Nathan ultimately located his voice. It was tense, rigid. Olivia, what is this? If you have some concern, you should have contacted me. I met his stare across the shining breadth of the desk. The gentleman I had once cherished. The gentleman I had once dreaded. Now I felt nothing but a icy, distinct determination. This isn't an individual issue, Nathan, I said, my manner sharp and vocational. This is commerce, particularly the commerce of Hawthorne Enterprises' recent purchase of Lumina Tech, agreement you individually supervised. The anxious whisper traversed the space. The other associates shifted in their costly seats, trading uneasy looks. That was an extremely triumphant purchase, Nathan boasted, attempting to recover his balance. One of the most lucrative agreements of the previous financial year. Lucrative for whom precisely? I retorted, opening my portfolio. It was certainly lucrative for you with your unprecedented incentive. It was lucrative for this organization, but it was attained through approaches that Hawthorne Enterprises finds morally dubious and image-harming. I continued to present it point by harsh point. I utilized the very business terminology he had once brandished like an armament to make me feel insignificant. I discussed investigation, trustee duty, and trademark honesty. I detailed the defamation effort against Lumina's leader, supplying proof of inserted news pieces and compensated digital agitators. I outlined how Shadow Equity had capitalized on its internal awareness of Hawthorne's curiosity to sell short equity before the merger was declared, a method that verged on market tampering. With every phrase, the hue drained further from Nathan's countenance. The facade of assured allure was vanished, substituted by a frantic, alarmed rage. He was being deconstructed element by element in front of the very gentleman whose admiration he desired above all else. Thus, I wrapped up, my tone echoing with an authority I didn't realize I owned. Hawthorne Enterprises is formally initiating a comprehensive autonomous review of all transactions managed by Shadow Equity Group over the past 24 months with a particular emphasis on the Lumina merger. We will be suspending all present and forthcoming commerce with this organization until the review is finished. Quietness. A dense, astonished quietness filled the space. This wasn't just a reprimand. It was a proclamation of conflict. Forfeiting the Hawthorne account would be a disastrous strike to the organization. And then a minor jarring noise disrupted the strain, a gentle tap of heels on stone. The conference chamber doors parted again and Mia Harper floated in, a bright, unaware grin on her countenance. She was holding a purchasing sack from Gucci. "Nathan, sweetheart, sorry to disrupt," she sang. But I was just adjacent, and I thought she faded, her grin wavering as she absorbed the scene. The somber-faced council members, my formidable juridical squad, and Nathan, who appeared as if he had just witnessed a specter. Her eyes ultimately settled on me, perched at the desk as if I possessed the location. Her impeccably adorned countenance registered a spark of confusion, then emerging terror. She had entered expecting to observe another of her betrothed's successes. Instead, she had stumbled upon his communal demise, and for the first time she perceived the fissures in the base of the influential gentleman she had linked herself to. She perceived frailty. Nathan gazed at her, his demeanor a mixture of rage and disgrace. Her attendance was the ultimate absurd insult in his disintegration. I sealed my portfolio. We will communicate, gentlemen. I ascended and departed the space, my squad trailing in my path. I didn't glance back. I didn't require to. I could sense the destruction I had abandoned. The contest had been engaged. And for the first time in my existence, I had prevailed. The immaculate contemporary loft that had once been my confinement now became Nathan's. It was a display model of a residence, all ivory hide, metallic and crystal crafted to astonish, not to soothe. Now its icy, pristine contours seemed to ridicule him, mirroring his own disintegration. The consequences of the conference chamber clash were rapid and savage. The news of the Hawthorne Enterprises review sent tremors through the investment community. Shadow equity plummeted. Nathan's associates, gentlemen who had patted him on the back and shared spirits with him to commemorate the Lumina agreement, were now handling him like an outcast. They were separating themselves, safeguarding their own concerns, readying to present him as a sacrificial offering to placate their most crucial patron. The pressure vessel of his existence was approaching a critical juncture, and the facade of the alluring, unbeatable Nathan Brooks was commencing to fracture and detach. The gentleman beneath was someone I had only glimpsed during our union, a gentleman devoured by a terrifying self-centered fury. Mia was the main object of this newfound anger. She, who had been selected for her ornamental attributes, was now our observer to his disgrace, and he couldn't tolerate it. "What the devil were you contemplating?" he yelled at her the evening after the council gathering, his tone resounding in the vast vacant area of their lounge. He hurled his satchel against a partition, dispersing papers across the ivory stone floor. "Entering there with your purchasing sacks like a mindless fool. Did you want to make me appear even more pitiful?" Mia, who was accustomed to being commended and indulged, recoiled. Her whole life tactic had been to connect herself to an influential gentleman, to be the attractive, encouraging companion, to a champion. She had no strategy for this. "I didn't realize, Nathan," she sobbed, her tone slender and prepared. "How was I supposed to realize she would be there? Your former wife, what is she even performing? What is she performing?" Nathan chuckled, a rough, unattractive noise. "She's attempting to ruin me. That's what she's performing. The pitiful little curator I retrieved from the obscurity. And she thinks she can ruin me." He commenced to stride. A confined beast. His motions abrupt and fierce. "It's that elderly gentleman, Pierce. He's manipulating the controls. She's not intelligent enough to have devised this on her own. She probably can't even manage her own finances." But even as he uttered it, a fragment of uncertainty had evidently rooted. The lady he'd observed in that conference chamber was not the lady he had divorced. That lady had been composed, eloquent, and completely in command. She had brandished his own terminology against him with a healer's accuracy. He had forged a narrative of her frailty for so long that he had come to accept it himself. Now that narrative had been fragmented, and the mental discord was propelling him insane. Over the subsequent week, circumstances worsened. The initial discoveries of the review were disclosed to the media, detailing the immoral tactics employed in the Lumina agreement. Nathan was positioned on unlimited absence from the organization. His communications to his associates went unreturned. His domain, once a cosmos that orbited around him, was swiftly contracting. He imbibed excessively. His days a haze of costly whiskey and acrid rambling speeches. He attacked Mia for the tiniest matters, the manner she arranged the washer, the noise of her inputting on her device, her mere attendance in the space. His allure was vanished, substituted by a raw, frantic harshness. Mia observed him, her scheming intellect functioning. She had connected her carriage to a luminary, but the luminary was descending to ground in a sphere of fire. Her appeal to him had been wholly based on his influence, his position, his riches. With those elements vanished, what remained? A acrid, furious, vanquished gentleman, a burden. She began formulating silent arrangements. She spent her days not acquiring on Fifth Avenue, but in discreet gatherings in tranquil cafes. One was with a promoter to deliberate how to handle the narrative of her separation from a prominent, dishonored investor. The other more vital gathering was with one of the most merciless separation lawyers in New York. Mia was a creation of a superficial exchangeable world, and she was nothing if not a realist. She was readying to reduce her deficits and proceed. One twilight she returned to find Nathan perched in the obscurity, a partially vacant container of Glenfiddich on the crystal surface beside him. "Where have you been?" he mumbled, his eyes inflamed. "I was out with companions," she deceived fluidly. He regarded her, a peculiar, pitiful expression on his countenance. It was a frantic appeal for something. Assurance, fidelity, compassion. "They're going to dismiss me, Mia. They're going to seize everything." For an instant, a spark of something, perhaps authentic empathy, crossed her countenance, but it was swiftly quenched, substituted by a cool, firm evaluation of the circumstance. This was her instant to shift. "Well, Nathan," she said, her tone lacking its usual effervescent pretense, "maybe you should have contemplated that before you undervalued your former wife." She proceeded past him, her heels tapping resolutely on the stone floor, and entered the sleeping chamber, shutting the door behind her. Nathan was abandoned, isolated in the gloom, the phrases lingering in the atmosphere like an execution order. He had forfeited his corporation. He had forfeited his repute, and now he had forfeited his trophy. He was utterly, completely isolated. A ruler overthrown in his own icy, vacant fortress. And the designer of his ruin was the one individual in the world he had been so assured he had already conquered. While Nathan's world was collapsing, I was entering a fresh one. Edmund organized for me to visit my grandfather's property, a location I now possessed, but had never observed. It wasn't an ostentatious, contemporary residence like the one Nathan desired. It was a historic brick villa nestled on an expansive forested land in the Hamptons, an hour east of the metropolis. It was a location of serene, subtle refinement, a residence that had been inhabited and cherished for generations. Entering through the main entrance was like retreating in time. The atmosphere scented of ancient volumes, candle wax, and a faint hint of the cigar smoke my grandfather had enjoyed. The residence was filled not with fashionable designer pieces, but with comfortable, cherished items, family images, and creativity. So much creativity. My grandfather, it emerged, had been an accumulator of immense discernment and zeal. The partitions were adorned with canvases I had only ever observed in galleries. A modest evocative Turner, a lively Degas, an initial drawing by Monet. My curator's spirit throbbed with a bittersweet delight. This was a dialect I comprehended. This was a portion of him that felt instantly recognizable. Edmund had provided me the access to his personal library. It was a haven, a chamber lined from base to roof with bookcases, a large worn hide armchair situated by a brick hearth. This was the core of the gentleman, and it was here I began to truly locate him. I discovered his diaries, decades of them, filled with his refined, winding script. He composed about his commercial agreements, his journeys, his reflections on doctrine and governance, but mostly he composed about his daughter Elena, my mother. He composed about his hunt for her, his aspirations, his apprehensions, his profound and ceaseless remorse. I observed a young lady today who resembled her. One record from 1985 read, "She had the same auburn wavy locks I recall from her infant image." For an instant, my heart ceased. I almost shouted her designation, but it wasn't her. "It's never her." Reading his phrases, I felt the abyss of my own sorrow expand, but it was also filled with a fresh, profound sense of linkage. This residence was not just an assemblage of properties. It was a storehouse of my lineage's heritage, my heritage. As the review of shadow equity advanced, revealing more and more of Nathan's careless and immoral negotiations, my viewpoint began to change. My preliminary justified indignation was gradually being substituted by something else. Observing Nathan's existence crumble from afar was not bringing me the fulfillment I thought it would. It just felt sorrowful, vacant. Ruining him was not the solution. That was his method of reasoning, his all-or-nothing contest of victors and defeated. My grandfather had been a creator, not a ruiner. I realized the authentic power of my inheritance wasn't as an armament to chastise Nathan, but as an instrument to construct something superior. My redemption path, I comprehended now, was not about prevailing over my former spouse. It was about advancing beyond him completely. It was about outlining my own heritage. I summoned a gathering with Edmund and the Hawthorne juridical squad. I had a fresh scheme. I don't desire to litigate shadow equity into extinction, I declared, much to their astonishment. And I don't desire to witness Nathan in prison. I desire to utilize the influence from this review to compel a settlement. My scheme was dual. First, shadow equity, under the menace of both a lawsuit from Hawthorne and a possible regulatory probe, would be compelled to finance a complete compensation bundle for Lumina Tech. They would supply the funds to restart the firm, reinstate the original owners, and return its brilliant leader, Dr. Elias Kane, to his rightful role. They would rectify what they had so savagely shattered. Second, I desired to generate something fresh, something that would honor both my mother's memory and my own enthusiasms. I informed them I was founding the Elena Moretti Trust, a benevolent entity devoted to aiding budding creators and funding creative learning initiatives in underprivileged New York institutions. It would be gifted with an preliminary $50 million from the Hawthorne property. It was my own vision, the one Nathan had ridiculed for a decade, now being actualized on a scale I could never have envisioned. It was a way to contribute, to generate beauty and opportunity, to transform the agony of the past into a vow for the future. Edmund Pierce regarded me, a gradual, proud grin spreading across his countenance. "Reginald would have been so unbelievably proud of you, Olivia," he said, his tone heavy with sentiment. Standing in my grandfather's library, encircled by his volumes, his creativity, and his recollection, I finally felt like I was home. I was no longer just Reginald Hawthorne's successor or Nathan Brooks's former wife. I was Olivia Moretti, and I was just commencing to uncover who that lady was. She was not a sufferer. She was not a storybook royal. She was the designer of her own existence, and she was finally prepared to commence constructing. The plea for a gathering came through Edmund, an official, almost pitiful request. Nathan desired to encounter me isolated. No attorneys, no facade. I consented, selecting an impartial site, a serene corner desk at an upscale eatery in an inn where neither of us had ever been. It was a location with no heritage, no specters. He arrived appearing like an emptied version of himself. His costly garment dangled on him. His countenance was thin, and the assured stride was vanished, substituted by a fatigued, vanquished droop. He appeared older, smaller. Mia had abandoned him, a fact I'd learned from a brief, sympathetic piece in a rumor section. His organization had compelled his departure, granting him a separation bundle that was ample by ordinary measures, but an affront by his. He was an exile in the world that had once venerated him. He settled opposite me, evading my eyes. For an extended instant he just gazed at his hands, resting on the crisp white covering. "Olivia," he ultimately said, his tone hoarse. I don't even know what to utter. I waited, mute. I was not here to forgive him, nor to boast. I was here to seal a section. "I know you think I'm a beast," he proceeded, finally looking up. His eyes were inflamed, frantic. "And perhaps I am. I became so engrossed in the contest, in prevailing, I lost sight of everything else, of you." He attempted to evoke some of the old allure, the manipulative honesty that had once functioned so well on me. "I contemplate us, the positive times, Province, that small unit we had in Greenwich Village before all of this lunacy." He was appealing to our mutual heritage, attempting to locate a fissure in my defense, a path back to the lady he thought he could dominate. But that lady was vanished eternally. "That was an extended time ago, Nathan," I said, my tone balanced, lacking the indignation or agony that had once devoured me. "We are not those individuals anymore." "But I could be again," he implored, inclining forward. This has been a revelation. You've awakened me, Liv. Perhaps this is a fresh opportunity for us. You possess everything now. We could possess everything." The pure, astonishing boldness of his proposal almost made me chuckle. He still perceived me not as an individual, but as a property he had forfeited and now desired to reacquire. "No, Nathan," I said, and the conclusiveness in my tone was total. "There is no us. There is no fresh opportunity. You are here because you desire something. So, let's cease the drama and arrive at it." His countenance dropped, the pitiful facade of remorse substituted by a spark of his old acrid indignation. He had engaged his final strategy and it had failed. I presented the conditions, the ones my attorneys had already submitted to his. They were unalterable. His organization would advance with the full compensation of Lumina Tech. He would release a communal regret to Dr. Elias Kane, and he would endorse a thorough confidentiality pact vowing to never reach me, discuss me, or approach me ever again. In exchange, I would not pursue individual juridical action against him for his role in the merger. "It's an ample proposal, Nathan," I said, echoing the term he had hurled at me in that attorney's office a existence ago. Considering the circumstances, he gazed at me, the actuality of his total defeat finally absorbing. He had no maneuvers remaining. He had been outsmarted, outplayed, and completely stalemated. "You've really become him, He ejected a final frantic attempt to injure me. "Your grandfather, icy, merciless." I simply grinned, a small, sorrowful grin. "No, Nathan. I've become me." He had nothing remaining to utter. He nodded. A single abrupt motion of capitulation. He ascended, pivoted, and departed without another syllable. A specter vanishing from my existence for good. I remained for an instant, sipping my liquid, the quietness of the eatery, a tranquil remedy. I didn't feel success or loathing or even compassion. I just felt serene, a serene sense of tranquility. Later that twilight, I stood on the brick terrace of my grandfather's residence, overlooking the vast, dark stretch of the Atlantic. The metropolis horizon sparkled in the distance, a stream of gems. It was a world of immense influence and riches, a world that was now mine. But standing there in the cool nocturnal atmosphere, I knew that the currency wasn't the authentic inheritance. The authentic inheritance was the discovery of a lineage I never realized I possessed. It was the chance to fulfill a vision I had almost forsaken. It was the serene, unshakable awareness of my own fortitude, my own value, forged in the flames of disloyalty and deprivation. I was not defined by the gentleman who had abandoned me or even by the grandfather who had located me. I was Olivia Moretti and my authentic tale was just commencing. Olivia Moretti's tale is a potent reminder that the conclusion of one section is often the unforeseen commencement of another. From the remnants of a painful divorce, she uncovered a heritage she never knew existed and a fortitude she never knew she possessed. It wasn't about the currency. It was about reclaiming her influence, her persona, and her tomorrow. If her journey from anguish to heiress resonated with you, please show your support by pressing the like button, sharing this tale with someone who needs a reminder of their own fortitude, and subscribing for more accounts of incredible change. What would you do with a fresh opportunity? Let us know in the comments below.